Harry Kennedy, 1578 Bryceville Road. I notice you have an ordinance, I'm sure there will be a public hearing sometime in February, to ratify approvals for the tax exemptions and abatement applications pursuant to the law. Is that correct, Mr. Mayor?
That's correct.
And those were the two tax abatements that were approved in 2016.
I believe around there. Yes.
Correct, Mayor.
None of you were, of course, now on Township Committee were here in 2016, I don't believe Mr. Egan was here either. The only one here would be Ms. Frydenfeld that's sitting up here. So those resolutions are incorrect, I take it?
Yes.
They were in the form of a resolution rather than an ordinance?
Correct.
And are you planning to memorialize those resolutions or to conduct a full hearing as an ordinance as to the appropriateness of those resolutions?
Yeah, Mayor, as with regard to that, the matters as previously voted on, as Mr. Kennedy has stated correctly, were voted on by resolution. Our ordinance, 34614, requires them to be done so by ordinance. We thereafter discovered that, and as Mr. Kennedy correctly stated, done improperly back then. Therefore, they're on for ratification. So there's three properties listed, two for ratification, one for approval, which had never been formally voted on in either form. So they are subject to a public hearing, and it does require a vote. However, the facts of the previous approval, even in a defective form, and the application of the tax abatement ordinance must be considered by the Township Committee when deciding that. So there will be, of course, a hearing, and all the facts will be considered by the governing body when making those decisions.
And again, so you're just not rubber stamping what was done in 2016, you're gonna hold a complete hearing in terms of the ordinance.
Correct.
And again, I'm sure, most of you are very busy and haven't spent as much time in government as Mr. Lyons and I. And I'm sure you didn't get a chance to go back and read the ordinance that permits tax abatement in Franklin Township. But I think one thing you should all be very clearly aware of is that all applications for abatement shall be filed prior to the township issuing a building permit. Just remember those very, very pertinent facts when you have the hearing on the ordinance to grant the tax abatements. I also would suggest, as Mr. Lyons so articulately pointed out, it's not going to be a rubber stamp, it's going to be a real hearing on the ordinance. I would very clearly have all the pertinent data from the Tax Abatement Committee, the minutes from that Tax Abatement Committee, the dates that things were filed with the tax assessor, what the previous administrator did at that time. I guess it was Deb Fleury. I mean, she was here before me. I was actually the acting administrator for part of that year, which makes it fascinating because, of course, it never came up for discussion while I was here as administrator. In fact, I knew who Chuck Starr was. I had no idea who Tim Doyle was, and the only reason I knew is because 2016 was a very sad year. We went from losing a former mayor in the middle of the year, and I can remember discussions about Tim with Ed during that year about what a great guy he was and how many things he did for Ed. But that, we can talk about that later on. I didn't know Mr. Doyle at all. But what I do know is when the building permits were filed, when the building was put up, when the appropriate time is to give tax abatement. I think one of the most articulate people about it was Mr. Doyle. The last meeting said it's a way to attract business to the community. Boy, is that a good reason to give tax abatement. It's not a good reason to give it once the building's been built. That's called the good old boys club. I'd be very careful when you have that hearing, and I'd be very careful about ratifying anything that was inappropriately given and cost the taxpayers of this township an awful lot of money. Thank you and good night.
Good night.